You're listening to NestTalk, the best and most elite Baltimore Ravens podcast on the internet. Now, here's your host, Christopher Linfante.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Ravens flock, my name is Christopher Linfante, bringing you an emergency edition of the NestTalk Podcast here with Dominic, a.k.a. Ravens Anatomy, to break down the first round of the NFL Draft. Dominic, how are you after this pretty insane first round?
Kind of mixed feelings, but I'm feeling pretty good.
Well, we had a lot of excitement. There were a lot of things that happened. Obviously, we're going to talk about the Baltimore Ravens pick Patrick Queen in a moment here, but I want to touch off with the first two picks. They were the most easy ones, the most obvious ones that were going to happen. We knew Joe Burrow was going to be a Cincinnati Bengal as soon as they were on the clock, although they took forever to get that pick in for some reason.
No.
And then Chase Young, no-brainer to the Washington Redskins, although there was some talk that they were getting trade offers from other teams, but both those guys off the board, easy picks there. And then, of course, though, after a few hours of waiting, the Ravens finally got to pick, and it is Patrick Queen, the linebacker from LSU. This is the first time the Ravens have taken an LSU player since their inception in 1996. They've never taken anybody from LSU since that point. And Dominic, what are your overall knee-jerk thoughts about picking Patrick Queen at 28?
I think it does definitely fill a big hole in the Ravens defense. I think it's someone that Wink is going to have a fun time with. Although personally, I was happy with no LSU fans taken, being an Alabama fan. But so I was rooting for Xavier McKinney, number one player on Mel Kiper's board, as it was showing at the bottom of the screen, scrolling throughout, and I was really surprised he fell. But hopefully they can make up a jump or something to get him, because I think he's also a viable asset. But switching back to Queen, focusing on him, I think he does a lot of good things well. As I do give him credit for that. The one thing personally, I think is just his tackling is just like a little subpar. But like him reading the run, playing the zone, I think he's just a really good all around linebacker.
I think the reading the run thing is going to be the biggest asset for Queen, because if we look at the Baltimore Ravens' weaknesses on defense last year, it really stems from tackling running backs. I mean, we saw it with Nick Chubb, they struggled. We saw it especially with Derrick Henry. If we get in another situation like last year with Derrick Henry, we would not be able to make tackles without somebody like Patrick Queen coming into it. But I was personally hoping for Kenneth Murray. I think that's pretty obvious from many of my comments on this podcast and other points. I thought it was going to be Kenneth Murray if he was going to be available. But in my my Ravens mock draft, I basically thought that both these players were not going to be available, so I picked us to get Zach Bond, but I was hoping that at least one of these players would be available. And I'm kind of surprised it was Patrick Queen. I actually thought Queen would go before Murray, but Murray would still go ahead of us. And when the Packers traded up in front of the Seahawks, directly in front of us, I thought for sure they were going to take Queen, but we'll talk about what the Packers did in a moment here. Are you at all surprised that the Chargers went for Patrick Murray? I believe they traded with New England to get him.
They did, yeah, and I'm really surprised they traded back into the first round just to get a player like Kenneth Murray. He is a really good leader from all the reports and stuff, but it's not like a lot of people are kind of disregarding that inside linebacker position. And the Chargers, they're very undersized at that position. I think the tallest player is like Denzel Perriman, and I think he's like 6 foot or something. So, and I think you have a 5'11" linebacker as well over there in LA. So, I think it was very odd seeing them trade back in to get a player like him instead of like later on, getting a tackle first and then trading back in for a quarterback, how everybody suspected they would do. But it's also quite surprising that they took Justin Herbert as well at the 6th pick.
Yeah, we'll talk about Herbert in a moment here. I think the Chargers' big goal for this draft, it seems like, is find two pieces they could build the future around on both sides of the ball. Obviously, when you talk about a quarterback, he's going to be the biggest piece for the offense. But what do they always call the inside linebacker, the quarterback of the defense? So they get that in Kenneth Murray. I'm not surprised if they were going to trade with somebody to get back into the first round. I'm not surprised it would be New England. New England, of course, doesn't really care if they have a first rounder or not. They're really looking for value more than anything. And Bill Belichick kind of delaying the need of quarterback here while Jordan Love was still on the board. But heading back to Patrick Queen for a moment here, I'm sure you all saw, since basically ESPN and NFL Network did the same broadcast this year, Daniel Jeremiah was basically saying, since he'd worked for the Ravens, he thought that Patrick Queen played like a Raven, and obviously it looks like our guys, Eric DeCosta, think the same thing. I think, as we talked about earlier, the biggest asset's going to be that run stuff ability, tracking down runners. And I think, you mentioned his tackling abilities, and I think there is some criticism that's valid there. But I think with the right coaching style and Wink Martindale, who's a linebackers coach, that's his pedigree. Yeah, he's going to be able to fix up Patrick Murray's small deficiencies and kind of make him a better player. And I think that's the overall goal for the Ravens. They just see the huge upside in not Patrick Murray, Patrick Queen at this point.
Yeah. I completely agree there.
All right, so now let's take a look at some of the other portions of this draft. Not a huge surprise that the Detroit Lions ended up taking Jeff Okudah at number 3. I think when we did our mock draft with Nick, we mentioned that was a possibility if we didn't take him. I don't remember. The big surprise, though, the first big surprise was the New York Giants taking Andrew Thomas, the tackle from Georgia, at 4. I expected them to take Simmons. I think we talked about this on our last podcast. Yeah. Some other people were saying other places on defense, and it ended up being a tackle. Kind of a lackluster pick there for the New York Giants, though. But after we get the Giants pick, this is where things get interesting. Tua Tagovailoa goes to the Miami Dolphins. There was some talk, I want to get your opinion on this, there was some talk that the Dolphins were thinking about trading up with the Detroit Lions or one of those teams up there, either them or the Giants, and taking Andrew Thomas, the tackle. Was that like a smokescreen, or do you think they actually were having these talks with the Detroit Lions before the draft?
I'm not sure about that, but I do know that I personally just trusted that they were going to take Tua because, I don't know, it's just like it. I feel like it was a smokescreen, maybe to, scare the Chargers, because that's like the second person or the second team that would jump ahead of the Dolphins to take Tua if need be. But I don't know. I kind of trusted that the Dolphins were going to take Tua all in all. So yeah.
I think my theory on this is going to be that it was a smokescreen, as you say, and I think they wanted to make sure the Giants would draft Andrew Thomas because. If they were thinking about trading up, then they would have been able to get Thomas, and if the Giants were thinking about moving back or something, they wouldn't be able to get him. So they wanted to make sure that they locked in the Giants with Thomas, then Tua would be right there for him. And then Justin Herbert comes off the board at number 6 for the Chargers, which is somewhat of a surprising move. I honestly didn't think they'd go with Herbert here. I thought that they were going to try to sign Cam Newton or something. But it looks like they want to stick with that pocket passer offense that they had with Phillip Rivers here, and he's going to be the heir apparent. What do you think about the Justin Herbert draft move here?
Personally, coming from what the Chargers were from San Diego, it's kind of in their blood to stick with that pocket passer, especially going from Phillip Rivers now to Justin Herbert. But the thing is Tyrod Taylor, he's more of like a mobile quarterback, and he's gonna move around the pocket to make the throw, or to gain extra yards or whatever, to put his team in that best position, where Phillip Rivers is going to direct traffic but while also moving in the pocket. So I think it's going to be hard for Herbert to understand from Tyrod, not having the necessarily same play style, but I don't know. I think if they went tackle, maybe even traded back just to get Jalen Hurts, and then just for the fifth year option. But Herbert was a Heisman candidate last year, or the year before, for a reason. So maybe they like his and he was very smart. Apparently, he was like a 4-point plus student or something like that. So
jeez,
so maybe they saw something that the general public really didn't see.
Yeah, I've heard Herbert been compared to Mitchell Trubisky a little bit on some of the issues he has, but hopefully he'll have a different career path than Trubisky, who,
Yeah.
still can redeem himself at this point. The Bears did not trade up to get a quarterback. I don't think they had a first round pick at all. Um, I think the move's okay. I would have liked to have seen them move in a more mobile quarterback direction. Obviously, Tyrod Taylor has a completely different skill set than Justin Herbert. But I guess it does leave the door open. If Herbert turns out to be a complete flop, at least they have some infrastructure there kind of to back him up and move on if they have to.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Panthers make a solid choice, Derek Brown, who a lot of people thought would maybe go in the top 5, but he slides to 7. And then I mean, I don't know how Isaiah Simmons fell to the Cardinals. I mean, he might be the most versatile defensive player we've seen in a very long time. He plays basically every position on defense, and he just fell into the Cardinals' lap. They didn't have to do anything to get him. Um, when he was falling, I was kind of teasing on Twitter with some of my followers that maybe the Ravens should just move up to get him and just get rid of their linebacker need at that point with Simmons. But I think it worked out anyway for us.
Yeah.
How do you think Isaiah Simmons for the Cardinals is going to be a good fit?
Yeah, I think with Patrick Peterson, coming to the later age, I think next year or the year after that, the Cardinals can take a top tier corner wherever their first year or first round selection may be. And then they got Byron Murphy on the other side, and I'm pretty sure he's pretty emerging, or maybe they even signed a free agent. But I think that with Simmons being that linebacker, safety, slot corner hybrid kind of player, even outside linebacker, that he can really shift, especially with the addition of Devon Kennard, who rushes the passer well and drops in the zone, or Chandler Jones, who just strictly gets to the pass rusher, and then they got like a solid defensive front there. So I think that with the addition of Simmons, I think it's gonna be a better defense for sure. And then so we'll probably look in these coming rounds for the Cardinals to get something on that offensive line.
Yeah, I think they're definitely going to have Simmons as a building block for the future at this point. And with Patrick Peterson there, I mean, they've already got some, defensive pieces. But Pat Pete is getting old, and Simmons being able to play cornerback too. I mean, he plays cornerback, linebacker, safety, outside linebacker, edge rusher, everything really. If Pat Pete, isn't able to hold down the fort a little bit, he could fill in over there. If somebody else is having an issue, he can fill in there too. Overall, I think it's just a fantastic pick for the Cardinals. They can't get much better value for number 8 there. And then we have the Jacksonville Jaguars picking up C.J. Henderson out of Florida, so he stays in his home state. It was also important that the Cardinals picked Isaiah Simmons when they did because we didn't want him to land with the Cleveland Browns. So the Cleveland Browns, instead of picking one of the best defensive players in this entire draft class, have to stick with tackle Jedrick Willis, who is very good in his own right, but he's not the transformative talent that Isaiah Simmons would be to that Cleveland Browns defense to wreak havoc on the Ravens. So then the Jets go Mekhi Becton, the Louisville tackle, pretty much a freak of nature there.
Mm-hmm.
And then a pick that would make the late Al Davis extremely happy. The Las Vegas Raiders picked Henry Ruggs III, the fastest player, I think, in this entire draft class. Just fits that whole Raider mold over there.
Yeah. So Henry Ruggs was, I watched him a lot out of Alabama with Jerry Jeudy and Devontae Smith, and I just recently was just like scrolling through draft players on YouTube or whatever, and just came across his story, and he was playing basketball in high school, on the team or whatever, and he had a best friend, and his best friend was like, go try out for football. So he tries football. He does really good at it. And he gets a few offers, and unfortunately, one day he's sick. Henry Ruggs is sick, and his friend, they're supposed to go to a camp or something. I forget where but they're going somewhere. So his friend is driving, and they get in an accident, and he flies out the window, and he goes into a coma. And Henry Ruggs' friend, he goes to the hospital, and Henry Ruggs runs like 5 miles every day just to go see him. And he really plays for him. So to hear like the passion and what he plays for and how hard he played at Alabama, it really showed. So I think it's gonna be a really good story there in Las Vegas.
Yeah, they were mentioning some of that on the ESPN show. I mean, that's honestly a tragic story to get to the NFL, but it just shows you like if you play with a passion and for someone you love, I mean, you can do great things in their memory.
Definitely.
But, football-wise, I think Henry Ruggs brings a new dimension to this Raiders offense. They're adding some speed. And look, they've got Josh Jacobs there, the running back, who rushed for 1,100 yards last year. But, the Raiders didn't have a lot of weapons, so they couldn't, move the ball downfield except, for a couple of the wideouts who weren't really going to be a huge deep threat there. So defenses would be able to stack the box against Jacobs, who, still runs for 1,100 yards. But now that you can open the top, kind of like what Marquise Brown did for the Ravens, opening the top, you have to move some of those safeties back. You can't stack the box against just Josh Jacobs and these other running backs there. So you're going to have a much more dynamic Raiders offense. I think that's what they really wanted with Henry Ruggs. And of course, you can't sleep on Marcus Mariota. He's a player there too, and they might make some packages for him and show off his speed as well.
Right.
And then we've got Tampa Bay picking up Tristan Wirfs. They jumped a spot with San Francisco. They must have been afraid San Francisco was going to trade with somebody else. Otherwise, because San Francisco was not going to draft this tackle. But Tristan Wirfs coming in here to protect their new quarterback, Tom Brady. Yep. Pretty good pick there. And then the 49ers pick Javon Kinlaw. And then another one of your Alabama receivers goes to the Denver Broncos, Jerry Jeudy. I think the best receiver overall in this draft class. Can you tell us a little bit as an Alabama fan about Jerry Jeudy?
Just a pristine route runner along with Amari Cooper. Someone tried to compare like both of them. I think I wouldn't give either the edge, but I would say they're good in their own rights. I think Jerry Jeudy is a bit more fast, but I think especially in the Denver offense is just going to kill with Cortland Sutton on the one side, and then Jerry Jeudy. They got the two, Philip Lindsay and Melvin Gordon in the backfield, along with Drew Lock. So I think as long as the offensive line stays healthy, and Noah Fant as well.
Yeah.
As long as the offensive line stays healthy, I think they're gonna do really well. So, I think the Broncos are gonna they might make some sort of run this year offensively, but I don't know. I really like that pick, and I'm really happy for Jerry. So I'm for sure going to start watching a bit more Broncos games, definitely.
You mentioned that offense. That's going to be the one to watch this season. They have an emerging quarterback at Drew Lock, who impressed when he was on the field last year. Of course, he was injured for most of the year before he got on late in the season off the IR. But they've got Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy now, Philip Lindsay, and Melvin Gordon, as you mentioned, and Noah Fant. So he's got weapons galore.
All of those guys very young, too.
They have the potential to be one of the most explosive offenses in 2020, assuming there's a 2020 season. But being the most explosive offense coming up here. Then the Falcons take AJ Terrell, a pick that a lot of people think they kind of reached for, especially with some of these other players on the board like Clavon Chasen, and then the Cowboys pick CeeDee Lamb. And honestly, How did this happen? How did CeeDee Lamb get to 17? That's my big question here. Jerry Jones, who looked like I think he was on his yacht, actually, hiding from coronavirus on his yacht. Yeah. And there were reports that he was going to be completely alone making this pick. So everyone was wondering, is he just going to pick Jalen Hurts out of the blue here? But no, he goes with CeeDee Lamb, probably the easiest pick he's ever made. In my opinion, the second best receiver in this draft class. Do you have any thoughts about CeeDee?
CeeDee, just a great receiver. Personally, again, just a quick little Alabama bias. Just had him under Jerry. They were both equally productive. But it was just, Jerry produced also while having two other players, two other first round wide receivers and a first round running back and a first round quarterback, so along with him. So it was just a bit more, talent surrounding Jeudy. But CeeDee, there's nothing to take away from CeeDee. He's just
Absolutely
one of those once in a lifetime, along with Jerry Jeudy, once in a lifetime talents. That's just not like a one. He can beat you deep. He can run after the catch. He can possession. He does it all. So I think it was just phenomenal steal, and I was not suspecting the Cowboys to make that pick at all. Honestly, I could have saw the Ravens trade up, like DeCosta was saying something a little bit after the draft that he was like, we explored trading up, but we saw what we liked at 28 and we just went with it. So
Well, DaCosta, even before the draft, was saying they were looking at trading, just period, trading down, trading up. There's a lot of options for the Ravens on the table. But once we saw CeeDee Lamb start to drop, a lot of Ravens Twitter was starting to think, if he's dropping like this, we might just want to trade up and grab him, maybe with the Falcons, maybe with the 49ers.
Right.
And I'm sure that Eric DaCosta had that conversation, but I would imagine the price they were asking for it was just too much for the Ravens. But it would have been really something to see CeeDee Lamb reunited with Marquise Brown, of course, their former teammates at Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Um, but honestly, though, I think it would have been more of a luxury to have CeeDee Lamb at this point because I still think the wide receiver core, before us getting Patrick Queen, our wide receiver core was better than our inside linebackers core. Now we can make the argument it's a little different now that we have Queen, but I still think that was the biggest need, and the Ravens ended up addressing that.
Yeah.
Then the Dolphins get protection for Tua, who desperately needs it with all his injury history, getting Austin Jackson, the tackle out of USC. The Raiders picking up cornerback Damon Arnett from
Mm.
Ohio State. The Jaguars snagging Clavon Chasen, who probably should have went a little earlier, but I like the move. A lot of people thought that they might try to take a quarterback in this class, so once they got to pick 20, the option for Jordan Love was on the board, but Jacksonville looks like they're sticking with Gardner Minshew, which I think is the correct decision for the time being. He played well enough last year, in my opinion, to keep his starting job. Do you agree with me there?
Yeah, definitely. There is also later quarterbacks in the later rounds. Anthony Gordon,
Yeah,
also from Washington State. Um, uh, um, the quarterback from Washington, Jacob Eason,
take a decent,
he's
yeah.
there, and Steven Montez, from Colorado. So like, there's other players that fit Gardner Minshew's play style, more of like in the pocket, but when he needs to scramble, he'll turn the jets on or whatever. So. I think there's a lot of options, especially in the later rounds. I don't see Jalen Hurts fitting in the Jaguar scheme, but I
Mm.
mean, if they want to take him and develop him along with Minshew, then it could be, some whatever they want it to be in the offensive scheme. But I think that there's plenty of options later in the rounds for them to explore a different pick at pick 20 and stick with Minshew.
Yeah, I don't think Jalen Hurts would necessarily fit their scheme at all, but I do like Jacob Eason a lot as a prospect. I think he has a huge upside. And if the Jacksonville Jaguars were to take him and kind of make a quarterback controversy down there in Florida, it wouldn't be the worst decision. But I think overall, Gardner Minshew is going to be the starter next year, at least for next year. Things could happen much later down the line there. And then there's a pick that boggles my mind. I don't know what Howie Roseman was doing here. Instead of choosing Justin Jefferson, who in my opinion was the best wide receiver on the board at this point, they chose Jalen Rieger, who
Mm,
I did not think would go in the first round, and that's also ahead of Brandon Ayuk. Okay,
yeah,
um, I honestly don't know why the Eagles decided to take Rieger. They must have been in love with him. Okay,
yeah, it has to be.
um, there has to be something there. I know a lot of Eagles fans are probably upset about this. Silver lining is I guess they really like him and they see something in him, but honestly, I just think Justin Jefferson would have been the best pick here. Even Brandon Ayuk, I could have seen being picked ahead of Jefferson, but not Jalen Reagor. I don't think I had him going in my mock draft until late in the second or maybe even early in the third round. So I think this is a huge reach for the Eagles here.
Yeah, I didn't personally like Rager. Kind of reminds me of the Nelson Aguilar pick, where he's just
Mm.
he's very quick and he has return potential, but he I I'm not really familiar with his catch percentage, but I was reading something that was like, talking about his catch it or him catching the ball and how he doesn't have the surest of hands. So hopefully it's not a repeat for Nelson Aguilar situation, but I guess hopefully he can just develop in the Eagles scheme and along with Carson Wentz. But they did need a receiver. I do believe that Justin Jefferson at the time was the best pick, like you said, or T Higgins even. I could have
Yeah, T.
seen
Higgins is still on the board.
it could have seen being good with that offense, but they ultimately chose Rager, and hopefully he can just develop with Carson and an offensive Eagles offense.
Yeah, if they have a repeat of Nelson Aguilar, that would be uh, devastating for the Eagles there. Um, But you're right. T. Higgins also on the board. I'm somewhat surprised he didn't go in the first round, but also not at the same time. I think when I did my draft review of him, I said that he'd basically be, in my opinion, a second round talent. So I guess a lot of GMs thought that at the same time. Um, but I think T. Higgins would still have been a better pick than Jalen Reagor. Nothing against Reagor. I just don't think the value is there for him at pick 21. And then the Vikings, who probably thought Justin Jefferson would go to the Eagles, especially considering the Eagles supposedly had talks with Jefferson throughout this process, just pick him up off the blue there. That was an easy selection for them. And then, of course, the Chargers take Kenneth Murray, ruining a lot of our dreams in the Ravens flock.
Right.
And then we had the New Orleans Saints picking Cesar Ruiz, which I think is a slight reach. I thought he would go late, like really late first, like the 30s or early second round. But, the Saints need protection for Drew Brees. This is his final year. There's no way he plays another year. And I guess adding this protection, it was pretty much the priority number one there, and everything else was going to be a luxury. But yeah, there was also talk that they might try to take a wide receiver, though. Do you like the Cesar Ruiz pick for New Orleans?
Yeah, like as I said in the NFL in the mock draft episode, if your guy is there, you got to take him, especially if it's to protect Drew Brees. I could have seen even Jordan Love go here at 24, but ultimately you want to win now, especially with Drew Brees only having like a year or two left on his contract. I think Cesar Ruiz was the best choice, especially with like the needs they have, and it's a very deep receiver class, as we all know. So I think they can make some things happen, especially with the limited amount of like holes they have on their defense and offense. So.
Yeah, they don't have a lot of needs as a team overall, so I think, it just probably made the best it was the best decision for them at this point. But, the Jordan Love issue here, replacing Drew Brees is going to be very difficult. Getting a head start on a quarterback would have made a lot of sense, but, there are quarterbacks like Jacob Eason, if they wanted to move to a more mobile direction, like Jalen Hurts, still available in the second round. So it should be interesting to see if the Saints bite on a quarterback tomorrow night.
Right.
And then we've got the San Francisco 49ers picking Brandon Ayuk out of Arizona State. And then the pick that pretty much, I think, is the most insane one of the night. The Green Bay Packers jumped ahead of the Seattle Seahawks and the Baltimore Ravens, who are trailing at 28 there. And basically everyone thought this was going to be Patrick Queen and that we were going to be screwed at this point. But it was not Patrick Queen. It was Jordan Love, the quarterback from Utah State. The Green Bay Packers basically did to Aaron Rodgers what they did to Brett Favre with Aaron Rodgers, drafting his successor like 2-3 years before he's even going to be needed. So everything is coming full circle here with the Packers. And when you look at the way Aaron Rodgers played last year, it wasn't like he was dropping in production. He had 4,000 yards. I think he had like 24 or 28 touchdowns and like 2 or 4 interceptions. Pretty good numbers, not the best numbers in total touchdowns, but the ratio there is still there.
But the most important thing is he took him to the NFC Championship,
and
too.
Yes, the NFC Championship. And plus they have Aaron Jones as the running back. Aaron Rodgers usually doesn't have a running back who does very well like that.
Right.
So taking pressure off of him. But he's, I think, still in the prime of his career here, and they are basically giving him the heir apparent to deal with. Now, we've seen in recent years quarterbacks that are drafted as heir apparents replace the sitting quarterback within like a year. So Alex Smith getting replaced by Patrick Mahomes in a year, Joe Flacco getting replaced by Lamar Jackson that year.
Right.
This situation doesn't feel like that, though. If the Packers are going to do anything, it's going to be the same exact thing they did to Brett Favre. Kind of just wait it out.
Yeah.
Because,
I think that's true.
Yeah, he hasn't played as long. Aaron Rodgers hasn't because he sat for 3 years in the beginning of his career. But, he is 36 years old. So at some point, he's not going to be like Tom Brady playing until he's 42. He probably won't even be like Drew Brees playing to him being 40. So they're going to have to deal with that soon. And the Green Bay Packers, instead of kicking the can down the road, just said, you know what? Screw it. Let's deal with it now. Do you believe this was the right move? Because I thought Jordan Love was really a second-round talent, to be quite honest with you.
I think what they're going for is, they're looking at Patrick Mahomes and they're looking at Aaron Rodgers and seeing similarities with both of those combined and seeing Jordan Love in a sense. So I think they are really, and even if you look back to Brett Favre, it really does show like Patrick Mahomes like does have very similar like throws and gunslinger mentality
Yeah.
to Brett Favre. So I think it's kind of like a more classic feel than bringing Jordan Love in. I don't think he is going to play very often, especially within the 2 years, how you were saying 2 to 3 years. So I think, he is really going to just sit back and learn, and he's going to fill that backup role. But I think he's going to do it well. I think he's going to, absorb a lot of information, really work, and I think it's going to continue the Packers, dominance, maybe not dominance, but aggressiveness and and fair play throughout the years. So
Yeah. And then after Jordan Love, which has to be, the most insane move of the night, the Seattle Seahawks make a reach for Jordan Brooks. This is a huge reach.
oof, oof,
Yeah.
yeah.
Where were you placing him, like on your draft board? Like what round were you thinking?
I'm not a professional, as I like to say, but to me, it was just he was not. He really wasn't up there. He was behind Willie Gay. He was behind Akeem Davis Gaither. He was behind Kenneth Murray and Queen as well. So, and I really do believe that I have a friend that's a Seahawks fan, and all he talks about is just like we need an O line, we need an O line. And when you hear
Yeah.
people say like, "Oh, what kind of pick you want in the draft?" I want to, the safety, a DB, a wide receiver, a running back, a quarterback, anything but an O line. Literally, even a defensive line over O line, linebacker as well. So it's really rare, and I believe a lot of Seahawks players fans do feel like they really just want O linemen. Like that's all they're asking for, and they're really not even getting it. Like no years they're getting it. So but it is really interesting to see that they might be drafting Bobby Wagner's successor already. I saw on Twitter, someone was like, "Oh, I compared him to Bobby Wagner." Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure, but it's an interesting comparison because they do look pretty similar stature wise. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Seahawks have in store. If they're gonna maybe they switch up their scheme because they don't really want to bring Jadeveon Clowney back, and they switch more to a two middle linebacker, two outside linebacker with three down linemen, like 3-4. But I'm not
Yeah.
sure. We'll see.
Yeah, obviously they need some offensive linemen. That's been an issue up there for a long time. And if the fans are clamoring for an offensive lineman, then the need has to be there because fans
Yeah.
never clamor for offensive linemen. Um, but I'm no professional either. But I had Jordan Brooks mocked to the Ravens actually in the third round, pick
Yeah.
106.
Third.
So I am not a fan of this reach at all. But then of course the Ravens picked Patrick Queen, which I think was an overall win for Eric DeCosta. And then to kind of close out the first round here, we had Isaiah Wilson, tackle from Georgia, going to the Tennessee Titans, protecting their new quarterback, Ryan Tannehill, who obviously had a great season last year, but they need to keep him upright, and block for Derrick Henry, of course. Then the Miami Dolphins, doubling down on names that are hard to pronounce, Igbeno
Mahogany.
Igvahogany. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I can't believe Goodell nailed that too. Like first
Yeah, I
try,
know.
he nailed that name. And then we have the Minnesota Vikings picking up Jeff Gladney, cornerback from TCU. And then the Kansas City Chiefs closed out the night by drafting Clyde Edwards-Helaire from LSU. So we went LSU bookends there, first pick overall and last pick in the first round. I was somewhat shocked that if they're going to draft a running back, it wouldn't be DeAndre Swift, but I know Clyde Edwards-Helaire is more of a pass-catching running back.
Mm-hmm.
He has a lot of that in his pedigree, so I guess the Chiefs want to have, I wouldn't call it a run game, more of like a screen game with him that they can use Pat Mahomes for, just dumping it down and kind of, confusing defenses to what they're actually going to do.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think this was the right pick over DeAndre Swift at that point?
Yeah, like so I mocked J.K. Dobbins to in our little mock draft. I
Yeah.
mocked J.K. Dobbins, and it might not have been the ideal pick for whoever, but I think it was just it was just more of like a 1-2 punch with Damian Williams. But when you watch Clyde Edwards-Helaire play, it's really similar to Damian Williams as like the screen game and just those yards that just add up. So I think it's like a really similar pick to Damian Williams. So I think they're both just gonna share reps, and I think it was a good pick though. It was definitely a good pick.
Yeah, I can definitely see what they're trying to do with it. But speaking of J.K. Dobbins and DeAndre Swift here, we have a lot of great names available for the Ravens and every other team tomorrow night. Now, tomorrow night is going to be rounds 2 and 3, so there's about 64 picks there. And the Ravens will have 2 picks in the second round, and then I think just 1 pick. I'm sorry, 2 picks in the third round as well. Yeah, so they're picking at 55 and 60 in the second round, and 92 and 106 in the third round. Who are some of the players you would like the Ravens to take a look at in rounds 2 and 3?
So I'm gonna kind of go by order, maybe of like who is going to be available, and I don't see maybe T Higgins or a top name at any of the specific positions we necessarily need, but I see maybe a Robert Hunt, the inside lineman from the I forget, Louisiana Tech. I'm not even sure, but or Lafayette. I don't even know, but I see Robert Hunt, so maybe an inside linebacker or inside lineman for our 55th pick, maybe our 60th.
Louisiana,
pick.
By the way, Robert Hunt's from Louisiana.
Yeah. And then at our 60th pick, maybe an edge rusher, Curtis Weaver. Yetur Gross-Matos, if he's still there, possibly, I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe an edge rusher, Terrell Lewis, maybe if he's available, or Raekwon Davis, interior D lineman. And then I'm not sure, but and then in our later rounds, probably a receiver. So.
Yeah, the Ravens are picking somewhere like mid to late with 55 and 60 in the second round here. So a lot of these names won't be available for us, but some of these really good pass rushers are still on the board, and that's going to be one of our big needs in this draft class to pair with Judon, assuming we still keep Judon. It's a done deal for now, but you never know what happens there. But we have, AJ Epinesa, Yetur Gross-Matos, Zach Bond, who I thought would be our pick tonight, assuming Patrick Queen and Kenneth Murray weren't going to be there. I'd be okay if we pick somebody like maybe Ross Blacklock or even Trevon Diggs from Alabama. I know we're strong at cornerback, but even just adding in guys that can maybe replace Jimmy Smith later on if we're just going to pad some spaces there. But I could totally see us addressing wide receiver too.
Yeah.
And a guy like Denzel Mims could be available. He's someone that a lot of people thought would go in the first round. There's no way T. Higgins is going to be available at 55. I'm telling you that right now. But Michael Pittman Jr. is a lot of guy Ravens fans are looking for. He is out of USC. So there's a lot of good players still on this board. I'd really look for the Ravens to either address edge rusher or wide receiver tomorrow. I think that's going to be those 2 positions are going to be the ones that we're going to look for. But of course we have 4 picks. So as long as we address those 2 positions, we could pick anything else after that. Right. Any chance the Ravens make a run at Jalen Hurts? I have to ask the question.
Oof. I'm not sure. I think it'd be maybe something. I don't know how smart it would be. I guess if he's there at, I doubt it, but the third round, even the first pick of the third round, it would be something to take a shot at. But, with RG3, and it looks like there's no plan to move him so far, but we're only the first day in the draft, and then Trace McSorley is there as well. So it's going to be interesting to see where he is.
Where everybody goes tomorrow. Yeah. The NFL draft, a lot of people only tune in for night 1, but things get even more interesting night 2. So thank you, everybody, for listening to this emergency edition of the NestTalk Podcast here with Dominic. We'll be back again tomorrow night recording another podcast. So this will be available Friday morning. Now, hopefully, it's not as long. I feel like the first round tonight was a little longer than normal. Hopefully, they don't take forever tomorrow night because I really don't feel like staying up to 3 a.m. to watch the final pick. But if they do, if they still do that, we will have to do that. But again, tune in tomorrow for the next emergency episode. And we'll do these emergency episodes throughout the draft here all 3 days. And then, of course, we even have to deal with undrafted free agents at some point, which is going to be a whole nother thing. But we'll do just like last year, we're going to do a tracker for that on the website. So stay tuned for that as well. Dominic, thanks for coming on. We'll see you again tomorrow, right?
Yep, for sure.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this emergency edition of the NestTalk Podcast. We will see you again tomorrow. Take care, everyone.
All right.